Mike McKinsey, you died, you saw heaven, you saw amazing things, but it's only until lately that there were certain things that you were allowed to talk about, which is very, very amazing. So take me back to the beginning here.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, Janie. So we attended my son's wedding. It was about 5 hours away from our house, and so we decided, since it was the last weekend before the kids went back to school, we decided to make it a kind of a short vacation. We got there on a Wednesday. Me and my other two boys went and played some baseball in the park, and I always like to mention that because it does come up a little bit later. And that night, Wednesday night, I started feeling sick, and I thought, "Oh boy, I'm getting the flu." But I just thought, oh, well, just got to power through it. The wedding's coming up on Saturday, so Thursday I felt worse. Friday I felt terrible. By then I was running a pretty high fever, and of course Friday night we had the rehearsal dinner. So we get through all of that, and I went back to the hotel room and I told my wife, I said, I tossed and turned in bed until like 2 in the morning. I said, I've got to go try and get something for this pain. My stomach was hurting so bad. So I go down to the quick stop. I grabbed some Tylenol, some Pepto, and came back and took all these concoctions, hoping that it would, just fix me up, right? Because I'm still thinking I've got the flu. Well, that night before the
But,
wedding,
well, now let me just ask you this. I mean, yeah, the night before the wedding, how did you even make it through that?
it was not easy. I mean, I was kind of laughing about it with the guests, saying, here I've got the flu, but this dinner is costing me a ton of money, so I'm going to eat all your leftovers, and everybody one of every dessert, and I just tried to just get through it. By then, I started looking pale too. I mean, I think my temperature at that point was over 103. And, everybody was kind of worried about me, but I said, I'll be fine. I'm a guy. We don't go to the doctor, right? Lesson learned there. So Saturday, we get through the wedding. It was Saturday night. And by then, I mean, I'm sweating. My temperature is up to 104. And some of my favorite pictures of the wedding are, of course, in black and white because you can't see how pale I am. So after the wedding was over, I told my kids, they were going to go they said, we're going to go to the bride's parents' house, bring the presents and open them and keep the party going. And I said, guys, I got to go get checked out. Something's wrong. I think this could be more than the flu. So my son's in the medical field down there. He told me where to go. So I go to the hospital. Of course, Saturday night, it's packed. Go to the ER. Took about a little over an hour to get back to see a nurse, and she's lays me on a gurney, and she's pushing around in my abdomen, and she says, I think it sounds like your appendix. And I said, well, I don't think so. I think I just got the flu. If you can just give me something, I'll go home and I'll be fine. Right? Telling the nurse what's wrong with me. Dumb move. She says, well, let's take some blood, send it off to the lab. And she said, I'm going to call a surgeon. And so she did all these tests, and one of the tests I remember that she did, because she was poking around on my abdomen, I thought, she would say, does that hurt? Does that hurt? Does that hurt? I said, no, there's no, they call it point tenderness. There was no spot where it really hurt. I just felt miserable. She tapped the bottom of my feet with one of those little rubber mallets that they check your reflexes with. And one side was fine, but when she tapped the other foot, and I can't remember at this point if it was right or left, but when she tapped that foot, man, I had pain in my abdomen, it made me scream. And she says, yeah, that's definitely your appendix, and based on your symptoms, it's probably ruptured. She says, have you done any unusual physical activity lately? And I said, we're just here for a wedding, but I played baseball with my kids in the park on Wednesday. And she says, Wednesday? Yeah. So she's thinking if they ruptured Wednesday, now it's Thursday, Friday, Saturday night, 3.5 days. She says, we got to get you back there and get you taken care of in a hurry because you're in a little trouble here. So we're away from home. We're working on logistics, getting the kids home, and, with grandparents. You take this one, you take this one. And we got all that settled. Um, they wheel me back to go into the surgical room. They burst open the doors, and they kind of slide me off of the bed onto the surgical table. And before they put a mask on me or before they put anything in the IV, any medication, because I hadn't met the anesthesiologist yet, I look to my right and Jesus walks through the doors, same doors that they brought me through. A physical person walks in wearing a white robe. His skin was darker than what I had been shown as a kid. His eyes were these dark greenish blue eyes, beautiful eyes, and I knew instantly it's Jesus. And I was confused, and I kind of looked back around like where are the other people? Everything was gone. It was just like white. There was like sparkly dust floating around. I look back and Jesus looks at me and he says, "I want to answer your prayer." And he holds out his hand. And now I'm still thinking, I didn't see myself float away. This is a physical person, and I'm still in my physical body. And I reach out and I grab his hand. As soon as I touch his hand, we're standing on a hill. It feels like a hill. I mean, everything around me is just completely white, like the brightest white I've ever seen. It's blinding, but I can see Jesus. I can see his hand. I look down and I can see my feet, my bare feet, and I'm standing on this beautifully manicured dark green grass. And my senses were heightened to the point where I could count every single blade of grass touching my feet. I knew exactly the number of blades of grass. And I look at the grass and I just think, wow, it's beautiful. But I'm still confused. I'm like, what's going on here? I think I might have died. And all this white kind of gives way, like somebody pulled a curtain from my right to my left. And as I'm looking at this curtain, it gets pulled away, and now I'm looking at this beautiful scenery. But what catches my eye is it's almost like a giant basketball size white ball, something whiter than the rest of the white, and it looks like a pearl because it's kind of luminescent, and it starts sending out these fluorescent light tubes. They look like a couple feet long, but they're fluorescent too, like pearlescent, and they go zipping by me. One of them hits me in the head, and as it does, it warms me all the way down to my feet, and it made this like light buzzing sound as it went through. It was the strangest thing. And now, as I'm looking at this scenery, so below the grass are these little flowers. They almost look like sweet peas. They're pastel colors. They're the most beautiful flowers I've ever seen, and they're moving like they're in the wind, like they're getting blown from wind, but there's no wind. So it's like they were dancing. And then at the bottom of that hill, there's this huge city, like a mile across. I mean, it was just huge. But now that fog that was in front of me, all that white that got pulled away, has settled into this valley. So all I can see through it is the building rooftops. It's like it's enveloped in fog, or a veil's laying over it. And it's that white kind of sparkly stuff. And I notice that there's a great big golden dome almost in the middle. There's other golden domes sticking through. There's mostly white buildings that are popping through. And there's a lot of buildings that look like church steeples. But one thing I noticed is there was no crosses on the top of the church steeples, which I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting, different. Made a note of it. And then on the other side of that city is another mountain that's huge, and it's covered in these beautiful, perfectly shaped, look like pine trees, but they have like these lacy pine needles on them. They're very detailed and just gorgeous. And above that is like the most beautiful sunset I've ever seen, but there's no sun. So there's these colors that are like vivid, bright colors. Some of them I can't even describe. I mean, I've always said if you take your iPhone, you take a picture of it, you move the saturation bar all the way over, the colors get really bright and vivid, but everything looks kind of weird. Well, everything didn't look weird. It was just beautiful. The colors were amazing. And above that, there were a few little clouds. And now those light beams, the one that hit me in the head, are going across the city, and one of them hits the tip of one of those beautiful pine trees. And it's like it had a diamond on the tip of it, because when that light beam hit the diamond, it burst into hundreds of these tiny little light beams. And then pretty soon, more of those things go across and they hit the tip. And so I've got these white fireworks that are glowing over this beautiful sky. And it was like white fireworks, but it was just the most amazing thing I've ever seen. I'm looking at it and I'm just in awe of what I'm looking at. And I look back at where they're coming from, that big giant round pearl looking thing, whatever that happens to be. And Jesus says to me, "It's the glory of the Lord." And when he said that, I fell to my knees. I was just overcome with emotion, and I got weak in my knees, and I fell to my knees. And the instant my knees hit the ground, they shocked me, and they brought me back.
Okay, now before we get to that, because there's some
Yeah.
very amazing things that happened to you after that, but I wanted just to mention that your book is "I Held the Hand of Jesus in Heaven." And so let me just ask you this. Was he holding your hand that whole time when you were seeing all those things?
Yes. Yeah. We stood there holding hands until I just lost it and fell to my knees. That's when I let go.
And he didn't say anything else to you until he said, "This is the glory
It's the
of
glory
the."
of the Lord. Yeah. That was all.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, we're going to be getting to in a moment some an amazing encounter that you had that is all connected to this. But please share this video and thank you for subscribing. Okay, Mike, keep on going.
So I spent 4 days in the ICU. I spent 12 days in the hospital. I did have complications. I developed an abscess. I came down with pneumonia the next day. And that sort of leads into the second part of this amazing encounter with Jesus. Um, but I first should tell you why I didn't say it, because this happened 20 years ago. And for 20 years, I only told the first part. So when I got back from the hospital, I had friends come over, from my church, and they came over and like brought me meals and things like that for my family, which was really cool. And I would sit down on the couch with them, and I was so weak still. I lost almost 35 pounds
Oof.
in the 12 days I was in the hospital. So that some of them, they were like, "Who are you?" You know. So they sat down, and I would tell them this near-death experience story, and it was just so emotional. It took me actually 3 days before I could even tell my wife, because I would just break down and cry. And so my friends would sit down on the couch with me, and like they would hold my hand and encourage me, tell us about it, and I'm sobbing and they're crying. And I get to the part where I say, "Guys, there was more to this, because 24 hours later, Jesus came back into the hospital room, and I had a 3-hour conversation with them." And so their expression, like every single one of them, like 6 or 7 of them, went from "Wow, this is amazing" to "Dude, you're crazy." You know, like like I lost all credibility. And after about the 7th or 8th one, I heard Jesus whisper in my ear, "You don't have to tell this part yet." And so I just I just shut up, and I was almost thankful, because I thought, the first part is so amazing. It was just so incredible, but they're not going to believe me, because they're going to think I'm nuts. They're going to think I'm crazy. And so I just shut up about it. And I've shared my story all this time, 20 years. It's kind of funny the way this whole thing was brought back up, because 8 years after my NDE, I wrote a book, and it did okay. I mean, I sold a few copies. But then 12 years after that, this is the part that really amazes me, how God was not done telling my story. 12 years after that, the Guideposts called me, and I have no idea, or contacted me through email. I have no idea where they heard my story, how they got my email. I didn't have a website. I had a social media presence, but I wasn't doing anything telling this story. They contacted me and they said, "We'd like to put your NDE story in one of our books. Would you talk to one of our authors?" And I thought, well, yeah, sure. But then I was like, well, how do they even know who I am? I mean, I'm a construction superintendent, working, 7 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon. So I did that, and I told their author my story. And then when the book came out, they asked if I would do a little marketing for them, kind of tell people in my church and all that. And I was watching a YouTube channel, and there was an interview with a guy, and I just felt like God was saying, I want you to contact this person. And I thought he was talking about the guy that was getting interviewed, but he was talking about the host. And so I finally figured that out, and I did, and sat down with him and told the story, and then I had other interview requests, and um, so I was reading a comment that from one of my interviews, an online comment, and it said, um, "You just had a hallucination because you had a high temperature." And I thought, well, that's certainly possible, but it doesn't explain the next day when Jesus walked into the hospital room, because my as I'm battling pneumonia, they packed me in ice and they brought my temperature back down to 100.4. And that's not high enough to have a hallucination. And when I read that particular comment, I heard Jesus say in an audible voice, "Now's the time to tell your story. Tell the whole story. Hold nothing back. You are ready and the world is ready." And I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. The world is ready. First of all, think about what YouTube was 20 years ago. It was music videos. That's all it was. There were no NDE channels. Nobody was really accepting of listening to a guy that died and then came back. It just didn't carry the weight that it does now. But people are hungry for the word of God. And I thought about, okay, I'm ready. What did he do to me to get me ready? Well, I was a construction guy, rough around the edges. I mean, I was a good person, um, a good role model. I did a lot of coaching with kids in baseball and football, and um, but I didn't like talking to crowds. And one of the things that Jesus talked to me about in the hospital room was, he told me, your story is going to be heard by millions. And I said, no, wrong guy. I'm not doing it. I am not going to talk to millions of people, because if you think about back then, in fact, I said, I'm not Billy Graham. I mean, if you want to talk to millions of people, you'd have to fill a football stadium, which Billy Graham did, but I'm not going to do that. I mean, who am I? I'm a guy with a story that people thought I was crazy for telling. So that's kind of where that whole thing uh, went.
Right, and you're going to get to the part that a lot of people didn't want to hear about, and
Yeah.
I would say not a lot of people, but some people, but everyone wants to hear it now. But I just want to go back and when in the hospital, because I thought it was interesting that they had said that that was the worst case that
Yeah,
you had.
the surgeon the next day came to see me, and he says, "Man, yours was the worst case I've ever seen." As he's poking around, checking my stitches and all this, and I said, "You're kidding me." And he says, "No, actually, it's not the worst I've ever seen where the patient lived, because I've seen worse, but no one's made it when it's that bad." And he says, "You shouldn't be here." And he actually said to me, "God is not done with you yet."
That was definitely a prophetic word. Now, tell
Yeah.
me about the two prayers that God answered.
So the first one, when I was a little kid, and this took a while to figure out. It took me a little bit thinking, what, he said, "I want to answer your prayer." What prayer? I mean, the last prayer that I prayed before going into surgery was, "Hope things go well, guide the surgeon's hands," all of this usual stuff you say before you go in under the knife. But I remember that as a kid, I went to my grandfather's funeral when I was 5 years old, and the priest is up there talking about heaven. Your grandfather Pete is in heaven. Pete's in heaven. He's no longer in pain. He's got all the, there's no sorrow. There's all these great things. And I remember thinking, God, that sounds like a really cool place. Could you show me heaven? And that really became a nightly prayer of mine as a kid. I would every night, now I lay me down to sleep, pray the Lord my soul to keep, that little prayer. And then I would always say, "Oh, and show me heaven." I want to see heaven.
Wow.
And that lasted for probably 10 years. And I'd forgotten about it. But then, laying there in the hospital, I was like, oh, that's what he did. And the other prayer that he answered was back when I was a kid, I would lay on the floor and watch a Charlie Brown Christmas, and with my family. I mean, it wasn't like you could log on and watch it anytime you wanted. It had to be Tuesday night at 8 o'clock, right? Charlie Brown Christmas. So I'm laying there, and when the part where Linus comes out on the stage, he walks out and he says, he quotes from Luke, and he says, "The glory of the Lord shone all around them." I remember thinking, wow, what must that look like? That's got to be really cool. Could you show me the glory of the Lord while you're showing me heaven? And I mean, 40 years later, it was exactly 40 years later, he answered both those prayers.
Right. And what an amazing sight. I mean, can you still picture all of it, of seeing those light beams and
Yeah, that part has really stuck with me. I mean, if I close my eyes, I can almost feel like I'm back there. Now, the conversation with Jesus, I actually kept notes in the hospital so that I wouldn't forget anything, because I just thought this is just so crazy. When I was finally strong enough to pick up a pencil and hold it, I had my wife bring me a notebook and a pencil, and I wrote down everything that was said. But even then, like I've forgotten a few things that Jesus would say, and I have to go back and look at the notes and go, oh, that's right, yeah, he did say that. So so
and so when he came into the room, I forgot. So how many days later was that after you had died?
so I went in Saturday night, and then Sunday night at 2 in the morning, I woke up and I had to call the nurse because I was really having a hard time breathing. I felt like, honestly, I felt like I was going to die because, and I thought that's why Jesus showed me heaven, because he wants to put me at ease and let me know that, I've prepared a place for you, right? So the nurse comes into my room and she puts a stethoscope on my chest, and I will never forget her words. She says, "Oh, honey, you're developing pneumonia." And she says, "You don't want pneumonia." So she calls a couple other nurses, and they all come in. They pack me in ice. She took my temperature. It was still 104.3, I think it was. They packed me in ice. They put me on oxygen. They gave me a spirometer to breathe into, which is a tube with a little marble in it, and you have to blow it to make the little marble move. And she says, do that 10 times an hour. And she sat down at the bed, and she says, "I'm going to stay with you for a while, remind you to breathe and keep an eye on you." And this is still was in ICU. And so the other nurses leave. And as they're walking out, the only way I can describe it is I felt a holy presence enter my room. And I do kind of go into some detail in the book of why I call it that, but I couldn't see Jesus this time. But I knew he walked in. I knew he sat down at the end of the bed. And I'm looking at the clock. So the nurse is to my right. Jesus is on my right side at the end of the bed, and there's a clock right above on the wall. So I look at it and it says 2 o'clock, 2 a.m. Jesus says to me, "Michael," and I'm kind of freaked out at this point because I'm thinking, okay, I'm done. I'm not going to survive. He's going to take me. And he says, "I had to get you flat on your back, away from all the distractions, so you could hear me." And I'm looking. I don't see him, but I said, "Jesus, is that you?" And I look over at the nurse because I think I'm talking audibly. I look at the nurse and she doesn't hear me. She can't hear me speak. And I looked at her and I said, "Did you say something?" Thinking that maybe she said, my name, Michael. And she says, "No." And she goes, "Why don't you breathe into the spirometer again?" So I tried, the little marble didn't move. And so I start talking to Jesus again. And I said, "Are you here?" And he says, "Yes." And I said, "Is this really happening? I mean, is this real?" And he says, "Yes, it's real." And then he said again, "I had to get you flat on your back, away from all the distractions so you could hear me. And he didn't say so you would hear me. He said so you could hear me. So something about my lifestyle. I had a very stressful job. I was very busy with my kids, doing coaching, and I was doing all these athletic organizations, running all this stuff. I was just so busy, so stressed out that I just didn't have time for Jesus. I didn't have time for the Bible. I mean, I barely made it to church on Sundays. It just wasn't important. And I don't think he was happy with that. He wasn't happy with that lifestyle. So he kept talking. He said, "I'm I'm okay with I'm okay with your faith, or I'm good with your faith, but I'm going to ask you to do more." And that's when he said, "Our story is going to be heard by millions." And I said, "Oh no, you got the wrong guy. No, I am not Billy Graham." And he kind of chuckled. He actually just kind of chuckled, and he said, "You've got a few valleys to walk through, but I'm going to ask you to do more." And he said, "The valleys that you're going to walk through, uh, just know that I've approved it, and you're going to come out of each one. You're going to be fine. It's going to strengthen your faith. Just know that I'm going to carry you through those valleys, and we're going to tell our story." And yeah, it kept going. It was a 3-hour conversation. It just kept going. It was crazy.
Now, what did his voice sound like?
It was the same voice that I heard, obviously, when he walked in and said, "I want to answer your prayer." His voice, I, to say it just sounded normal, authoritarian. Um, when he speaks to me, and I've heard it since I've left the hospital too, audibly. Uh, it always kind of sounds like a father figure, like, you know, "I know what I'm doing. Don't question me." And of course I wouldn't, except when he said, "Your story's going to be heard by millions." Um, it was just the authoritarian. Uh, that's what always comes to mind when I try to describe it. It wasn't a deep voice, high voice. It's just a man's voice.
And when he was speaking, I know that you didn't see him that time. I
Right.
mean, did it sound like, okay, it's coming from over here, or was it just all around?
It was like he was sitting at the end of my bed, like he had pulled up a chair. "Hey, well, I'm going to talk to you for a little while. You're going to pay attention." But I knew exactly where it was coming from. It was the corner of my bed, so it wasn't around. And I heard it with like if someone sat there, like the nurse was sitting there. It's exactly when she talked to me. I know that she's talking to me with. I'm hearing her with my audible with my ears, and she's talking in an audible voice. And it was the same thing with him. He was sitting right there.
Now, we're going to get to some more amazing encounters that you had, but when he said to you that there's going to be some, was it trials? What was the word?
Valleys, he said.
Valleys,
Yeah.
valleys.
Yep.
And so, how did you feel when you heard that?
I was a little scared, to be honest. Yeah. Because I thought, well, he's not getting specific. And I asked him, I said, "Well, you created me. I need to know. I want details. What's going to happen?" And he wouldn't answer that. He just kept quiet about it. Like, "You'll know when you get there." And he did say that I would carry you through that. "I'll be with you. You'll feel my presence." Those kind of things. Um, and I had some bad stuff happen. My dad passed away pretty suddenly, um,
Mm,
but I did feel comfort. Like Jesus was there with me.
wow.
Um, my marriage ended 2 years after this, and that was really tough. It was really hard on my kids, and I just felt comfort from Jesus. And you think, gosh, he said he approved it. Here I'm 20 years, almost 20, coming up on 20 years removed from that situation where I went through divorce. And he said that everything that I go through, that some of the valleys that I walk through, I'll be better off after going through it. And I am. I can honestly say now I have a much better life. I have a great relationship with all my kids again. Everything's repaired, and everything's great. I mean, uh, but I could have never imagined that I would be in this place, not just where I live, but in this place with my relationship with Jesus, if it wasn't for that encounter and all the things that I'd gone through.
I think it's so interesting that Jesus said to you that you would be protected by angels. Can you explain?
Um, yeah, you know, I was told by a friend that I had a guardian angel, that an angel was assigned to me. And then she has this all these prophecies about things that I've gone through that she's told me through the years. Um, there is an incident that I got to tell you about after I started writing the book, where I was attacked by demons, and I was told that I was that I was assigned another angel, and my wife was assigned an angel. So I had the two angels always with me. I've never seen them. I've always asked for that gift. But after that morning, I called her because I wanted some information on this demon attack. And she said, right now, your property is covered by hundreds of angels. It brings me to tears thinking about it. Hundreds of angels. She said, if you go outside and look, you might be able to see them. And of course I did, and I couldn't see it. But uh, yeah, he said that he said, when you step out in faith, the enemy steps up his attack. That was one of the things he told me during our 3-hour conversation. And he said, you will be covered by the presence of angels. So he wants my story told. For some
Right.
reason, it's amazing.
Now, what about but that angel, the angel encounter in your room on the bed?
Oh man. So I had uh, I had an eye surgery Super Bowl Sunday, believe it or not. My son is grabbing this bungee cord, and he's swinging it around like he's fishing, like he's throwing it around. And this bungee cord was a metal end instead of, like, a lot of them you get now are they're plastic. This one was metal, and I was on the floor leaning against the couch, and he scooted over, and he was right behind me, and he was probably like only 3 years old. He takes that bungee cord and he throws it, and it caught my eye. Like, the end of it caught my eye, and it scratched my eye really bad. So I ended up going to the doctor, and I started developing scar tissue about a month later. And he said, "Well, we're gonna have to do surgery on your eye." And that was, I said, "You can do that?" He says, "We're gonna cut the scar tissue off, and then we'll roll your eye around, cut a piece of the lens, and we'll sew it back onto your eye." I mean, I had no idea they could stitch your eyeball, but he did. It was very, very painful. 11 stitches on my eyeball. Okay. So I had this eye patch on, and I go home, and I'm laying on my bed, and I was praying because I was in so much pain. I was really, I was coming off the anesthesia that they give you, and I'm laying there praying and asking God, how long is this pain going to last? Because this is terrible. And I feel this on the end of the bed. I've got my eyes closed. Of course, one of them's patched up. I've got my eyes closed, and I feel the sheet tighten up on me like somebody sits down on the bed. And I thought it was my wife, so I took my hand and I was going to lay it on her shoulder. Well, my hand went all the way down to the bed, and it scared me. And I opened my good eye, and I look, and there's nobody there, but there's an indentation in the sheet where someone's sitting there, and I went like that. And as soon as I did that, I hear this voice, and this was not an audible voice, though. I hear this voice in my spirit say, "Don't be afraid." And as soon as I heard "don't be afraid," all the fear left. And the voice said, "I've come to tell you that you're going to make a full recovery. You're going to be in pain for 3 more days," or whatever it was, 3 or 4 more days. But you're gonna be fine. Don't worry about it. And then I look, and the seat like lifts up, like whoever was there left, and I just knew that it was an angel, a messenger, giving me a message, telling me that I'm going to be fine.
Wow. Now, how many years ago did that happen?
That happened probably about a year after the NDE.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Now, you've had some very interesting. Well, first of all, I want you to explain how the Lord changed you in all of this, but you've had some very interesting financial breakthroughs too.
Yeah.
But how did this change you?
It wasn't. Some people come back from an NDE and they say, they came back and they're instantly changed. For me, it wasn't instantly. I was kind of fighting. Like, I didn't want to be a disciple of Jesus. I didn't want to be that guy. I just didn't. I considered myself a Sunday Christian. We would go to church on Sunday morning because it was good for the kids. And I didn't really get a lot out of it. And then I finally started taking it seriously. I got baptized, but I didn't live a lifestyle that was. I don't want to say pleasing to God, because I've said this before. I'm a good guy. I was always a good person, a good role model for all the kids I was coaching. But I just didn't put Jesus as the number one thing in my life. It was more like making money, doing the job, coaching, doing all these other things, until finally, when I heard that voice of Jesus say, "Tell the whole story," I was like, man, I'm really different now, because I'll talk to anybody about Jesus. But it took 20 years, before I made that change. And when I think about, like, what Jesus said in the hospital, um, the world is ready and so are you. I wasn't quite ready to tell the whole thing then, but I knew that he was going to get a hold of my heart. And it took a while, but now when I read comments that are, people think I'm crazy still, it doesn't bother me. But when I read those comments, I think I need to pray for that person. So I have a lot more empathy, a lot more patience for people that don't believe. And I just look for a way that I can reach them for Jesus. I'm a disciple of Jesus now. I mean, I have a great relationship with him. I walk with him every day. I talk with him every day. A lot of times I will hear his audible voice. Well, I should say a lot. It's probably 20, maybe 24 times that I've heard his audible voice.
That's a lot.
Yeah, yeah, it's incredible.
Now, when you would hear his voice, I mean, 24 times, or would it be would he give you direction? Can you say anything that he would say during those times?
Sure, usually it's something that's pretty short. I can tell you a story about with really cool ending. And we mentioned finances, so this was kind of neat. We were at this church function. My church wanted to raise money for kids to go to church camp, and what they wanted to do was, and it cost $50 per kid. So what they wanted to do was raise money so that each kid in the neighborhood, they wanted to walk around and invite kids in the neighborhood to go to church camp. And they were thinking, it's a good way to bring people to our church. You introduce the kids to Jesus, and then they go home and tell their family how much fun they had at camp, and then they come to church. It was a pretty cool program. So we're sitting at this spaghetti dinner one night, and I hear this voice behind me say, "I want you to give $1,000." And I turn around like, who's back there? One of my buddies is telling me, right? There's nobody there. And it was like somebody spoke in my ear, an audible voice. And I said, "What?" And he said it again. "I want you to give $1,000. And so this time I turned around real quick, because I was sure somebody was punking me, but there's nobody back there. And I even asked my wife, I said, "Did you say something?" She says, "No." So I said, "God, I don't have $1,000 to give. I mean, I had 4 young kids that I was raising. I didn't have money to be throwing because I think God told me to give them $1,000." And the voice says, "You'll get it back." And I was like, what the heck is going on? Just like that, "You'll get it back." So I pick up my stuff and I walk out to my car, and I sit in my car and I start praying. And I said, "God, if you're telling me to give them $1,000 and I'll get it back, I'll do it. But this is going to be really rough. I'll write the check, but I don't feel real comfortable about it." So I grabbed my checkbook from the car I write a check for $1,000. I go up, put it in the basket, and everybody sees me putting a check in there. They're all happy. And as I'm walking back in, a buddy of mine sees me coming back in. He saw me leave, and he says, "Hey, are you okay?" I said, "Yeah, you're not going to believe this, but I think God just told me to give $1,000." And he said I'd give it back. And he goes, "Whoa." He says, "Are you doing it?" And I said, "Yep, taking a checkup." And then he says to me, "So if God told you that, God knew that you would tell me, and he knew that I would take that as a challenge." And he says, "If you do it, I'm going to do it." And I said, "Well, he didn't say you'd get it back, but he said I'd get it back." And he goes, "Yeah, I don't care. I'll give $1,000. So we both put the checks in the basket. So the next day I go to work. I come home. This was in a subdivision that I was building. I'd already built my house in the subdivision. We'd moved in, and I had done a little day trading of stocks back then. And I would, I'd be happy if I made $20 to $50 a week, right? I had these penny stocks that I would trade. So I come home and I'm eating a sandwich and I log onto my TD Ameritrade account and I look and there's $1,000 more in the account. And so I thought, what the heck's going on? So I looked at all the stocks. There was one of them that had taken a jump. One stock had gone up $1,000. So I sold it. And, because, until you sell, it's just paper money. It's not real. So I got the $1,000 in my account and I log off and I stood up and I thought, $1,000. I just got $1,000 back. And
That's so amazing. And especially when you're saying that, well, with day trading, you were only going to make maybe like 20, 50, whatever.
yeah,
But that was a very gigantic jump.
it was huge. I think there was only a couple $1,000 in there in total.
Wow.
Yeah. So I got the $1,000 back before the check even cleared the bank.
And now you had another encounter as far as financially. Tell me about the $200 or.
So I was the church that I was going to after the NDE. This was probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 years afterwards. Their youth pastor was not in the service, but he was out, with the youth in the youth building or whatever. But his family walked in, his wife and his 4 kids, and they walked in and sat down in front of me as we're singing a song to start the church service. And I hear this voice say, "Help them." And I go, "Oh boy, here we go again, help them." And I'm like, okay, what am I supposed to do? And I just heard it another time, "Help them." And so I sit down, everybody's singing, and I'm praying, and I'm like, "God, you got to give me instructions. You got to tell me what to do. I can't do something for them if I don't know what to do." And so we had this church picnic to go to that afternoon, and we decided to take my mother-in-law, who was living by herself, to the church picnic that afternoon. And so all that afternoon I spent it praying, thinking, you got to tell me what to do, Lord. How am I going to help them? And I just felt like there was never another voice, but I felt like he was telling me, give them some money. That's the way I solve problems. I hand somebody some money and hopefully they can fix the problem. So I thought, well, now I don't, now that I've decided on giving him some money, I'll give it to him at the church picnic because I'll see him there. I thought, how much? I don't know. And so we pick up my wife's mom. We drive, and I said, hey, I'm going to stop at CVS or Walgreens, whatever it was, and pick up a card, and I'm going to give the pastor some money. So I go up to the ATM machine at the front of the store, and the most I could get it said $200. It was like 100, 220, whatever. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to give him $200 since that's the most I can get. I get $200. I put it in a card, and as I'm in the store, my wife had told her mother-in-law that God told me to give pastor some money. And she's like, oh, that's really cool. She says, I want to help. So she pulls out a $20 bill from her purse. And as I get back in the car, she says, hey, I want to help out too. Here's another 20. And I'm like, $220 is kind of a weird amount. Let's just leave it at a nice round $200. And I said, besides, if you're supposed to give me money, I think God will tell you. And she says, well, how do you know he didn't? And I thought, oh, shoot, she got me. So I said, okay, we'll make the odd amount of $220. So I put it in there. I signed it. Hope this blesses you. If there's a need, great. If not, thanks for all you do for my kids. Sealed it up. So we get to the picnic, and he's in the dunk tank. He's a youth pastor, so he's in the dunk tank, and I never even did get to talk to him the whole time of the picnic. But I did give the card to his wife, and I said, hey, give this to Pastor. So that night, I get a call. It's probably 8:30, and it's the pastor, and he's crying. And he says, you're just not going to believe this. But he said, I got your card. I wanted to say thank you. And I said, well, sorry I brought you to tears. And he says, no, you don't understand. My wife was driving around with our kids in the van, the family van today, and she had a flat tire. And it felt like it was going flat. She goes into this tire shop in our little town, and it's this used tire shop, and it's not it's not a well-known big place. It's kind of a mom and pop kind of deal. And the guy comes out and he says, well, I can fix that for you, but he says, you need four tires. You need 4 new tires, because these tires are bald. These things are going to pop, and it's going to be dangerous. You can't drive this around. And he says, I've got 4 tires back here. They're used, but I mean, they're as good as anything, And she says, well, write me an estimate, and I'll talk to my husband tonight. So he writes the estimate, and that's when Pastor says, do you know how much those tires are going to be? I said, no. He says, they're $220. Like, that extra $20. And so, I mean, I started crying too. I just couldn't believe that crazy amount.
Yeah, and with that, your pastor then would know that God was really, I don't know, showing his love because of being so specific to the exact amount. I find that just so neat.
Yeah.
Now, I want to go to, because you've heard Jesus' audible voice, and then you've heard angel speak to you.
Mm-hmm.
What was the difference in their voices?
The angel, well, it was a male, but I honestly, I couldn't even describe it to you. It was just like soft and comforting. That's the best way I could say it, because it was almost like a whisper, but a loud whisper. Yeah.
Okay, and that was the angel that put the indentation on your bed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, and now here the Lord told you that you were going to speak to millions. How has that been fulfilled?
Gosh, I've spoken to podcasts like yours, and it's funny because I've had people. I have another crazy story that just came up of a guy that he saw one of my interviews. I hope we have time for all this. It's going to be kind of long, but just thank you for sticking with all these stories.
I love hearing this.
So this just happened a couple days ago. This guy had called me from Scotland, or emailed me from Scotland. He said, "Hey, I heard your testimony, and I really feel like God's calling me to start a YouTube channel, and I want to explore, NDEs and things like that. But I want to give glory to God." And I said, "You giving glory to God? I'm all in." And he says, "Can I interview you as my first interview?" And I said, "Yes." So he's in Scotland. We worked out the time. I gave the interview. He does these things with AI where he'll put some B-roll with it, and he does some music, and makes it kind of a cool thing. And he said, I put the interview up and it got maybe 20 views. And he said, so I did a couple of shorts, where it's like 3 or 4 minutes long. And he did one of me telling that $220 story. It's funny that you brought that up. Because that was one of the ones where he said, God, okay, if I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, if this is your will that I keep this channel going, I want to challenge you to get 5,000 views. Now, you know how hard it is for a brand new YouTube channel to get 5,000 views. So he's throwing down the gauntlet for God and saying, this is what I want. So he emailed me The next day, this was just a couple days ago, and he says, okay, not only did I get 5,000 views, I got 10,000 views. And he says, so I think that's pretty amazing. But it gets better than that, because this is the way God operates. He not only got 10,000 views, he said it wasn't quite 7 days, which is a week. He challenged God to give me a week. He said the next day, he sent another email. He says, Mike, I emailed you too soon. At the end of 7 days, I didn't get 5,000. I didn't get 10,000. I got 500,000 views. 500. And I think he's almost to 1,000,000. I mean, I was, I hate to keep saying I'm crying when I hear all this stuff, but it just moves me. So I was just bawling as I'm reading this. 500,000 views. That's how big of a God we serve. God can do anything.
Right. And from a channel that was just started, that is
He's
totally
brand new.
amazing.
He
And
has
he,
4 videos. They're all of me.
yeah, and here the Lord has had you speak. It's you have already touched places all over the world,
Oh,
and
yeah.
so that's how all of that was fulfilled.
Yeah.
Anything else that you want to share?
Uh, Gosh, when he said, when you step out in faith, the enemy steps up his attack. I did have, I had a pretty crazy demon attack, actually. About halfway through writing my book, I had fallen asleep on the couch. It was late night. My wife came out, threw a blanket over me, and went to bed. She takes the 2 dogs and the cat. They're all back in the bedroom, and I'm laying on the couch. And I had this bad dream. I was dreaming that we do some real estate flipping. We flip houses. We do real estate investing. That's what I've done for a living after I retired as a superintendent. Um, and I dreamt that I was inside one of the houses that we were flipping, but the back wall, where the back door is, had been bricked over. And so I'm looking at it. I'm going, you guys, you bricked over the door. How can I get out of here? And all of a sudden, these 2 like cardboard. They look like wet cardboard beings, but they were dark cardboard, about 7 feet tall. They were in the shape of people, but they were taller, but they were thin like cardboard. They start coming after me like they were going to grab me. They have these arms, and this is all in a dream. And so I yell at them, leave in the name of Jesus, but I'm all mumbled because I'm still asleep. One of them left right away. The other one kept coming at me, and so it woke me up. And as I wake up, I kind of see this thing in the darkness of my room, and it's gone from a nightmare to reality. It's there, and I yelled at it again. You have to leave in the name of Jesus. You have to leave. And as soon as I said Jesus, he leaves. But then I felt something on my shoulders. Now this is the really crazy part. I feel these hands like start reaching down my chest from behind, and I look down and I see what looks like tree roots, but they have a hand at the end. It's like gnarly old tree roots, brown tree roots. And I start screaming because now I'm awake. I start screaming, Jesus. I just start yelling, you have to leave in the name of Jesus. And I stand up, and as this thing leaves, I feel the arms pull back. It leaves, and I'm shaking, and I see the living room is next to the kitchen, and I see the light come on. There's a sensor light on our refrigerator, so that when you walk up at night, you want to get a glass of water, the light pops on, like if you walk by it. Well, there's no cat, there's no dogs, there's no wife, there's nothing in the kitchen, but the light popped on. So it saw something. And this thing, that's the way that thing left, was through the kitchen. And so I stood up, and I almost felt like that presence was coming back a few minutes later. And I just kept yelling out, you have to leave in the name of Jesus. And it finally left, and I felt at ease enough to go, and then I went back to bed, told my wife about it the next day, and she was pretty freaked out too. That's when I called my friend and I said, I need to talk about demons. Like, does it have a name? And She said, not that I'm aware of. I'm Googling, what is a demon? The demon with, that looks like tree roots. Didn't come up with anything either. Although I'm looking at all these pictures of demons, which was pretty freaky. But that's when she told me that I had all those angels around my property. So the next day I walked around with a Bible and I just claimed I had 12 acres. And I just walked around and I claimed that property in the name of Jesus and got rid of everything.
There's absolute power in the name of Jesus. I'll just say, I'll say this quickly, an encounter where I woke up where a demon was holding my arm, and I was sick at that time. And I started speaking. I mean, there's power in speaking his name. There's power in speaking his word, because his word that's who Jesus is.
Mm-hmm.
And I just said, God has not given me the spirit of fear, but a power, love, and a sound mind. When I lie down, my sleep is sweet. And by Jesus' stripes, I was healed. And as I was saying the scripture, this hand, which was a demon, totally let go. And it just proves, I mean, just like you said, there's angels. We've got all these angels protecting us. We may not see it. You got to feel it. I did. But I forgot to say that. When that demon let go, I looked up on my ceiling and I actually saw an angel there.
Oh.
So we're in a spiritual warfare, but greater is he that is in us than he that's in this world. We have an angelic army protecting us. So thank you so much. I mean, this was very, very amazing. And again, can you say the title of your book?
It is I Held the Hand of Jesus in Heaven.
And we'll have it in the description where you can get it. Thank you so much, Mike.
Thanks, Janie.
When Heidi died, Jesus took her hand and escorted her to heaven. Click the video to find out what he showed her.